Hi, everybody. Uh, Welcome to study guide number 18. I'm moving right along here. So today we're doing things a little bit differently. This isn't a live class, actually filming this. So hold on a minute. Okay, sorry about that. And anyway, due to time constraints, I wasn't able to do a live meeting this time, but we're going to talk about a couple of things that are pretty cool. We're going to talk about spatial resolution, and we talk about spatial resolution and recorded detail. Okay, they're the same things, and that is the sharpness or the unsharpness of an image. Okay, the sharpness between two given lines, right? And we always want as good a resolution as we can get. Okay, and there's factors that determine how good our spatial resolution is, and that's what we're going to talk about. With digital imaging, there's two factors: pixel size and pixel count. Okay, I just want you guys to be aware of those. We're not going to talk about those. We'll do a class a little bit later that goes a little bit more in depth with pixel size and pixel count. So I think to say that digital imaging is awesome, and there's a lot of built-in algorithms that help us get a good image. You really have to screw up to get a bad image, if that makes sense. But there are other factors that everything to do with spatial resolution or the detail of your image. Those are called geometric factors. Okay, and you've heard me talk about these before. There's three of them that we're going to talk about today. There's actually four, but basically three. The first one is SID. Okay, so here I've got an X-ray tube drawn. This is our X-ray tube. It's called the source. Okay, down here is our image receptor. Okay, or detector, and this is our object or patient. We don't refer to our patients as objects. But for this, we're going to show it as an object. Okay, so our distance between the source, which is the X-ray tube, and the image receptor, okay, that's called our SID. Okay, source to image distance, or source to image receptor distance, SID. Okay, the second one is OID. Okay, so we've got our object or our patient. So the distance between a patient or object and the image receptor, that's called our OID. Okay, object to image distance. Okay, I mean, it says it right in there: object, image, source to image. Okay, and then we've got one more distance here, which is our source to object distance, which is our SOD. Okay, if you listen to a lot of radiology stuff, you're going to hear SID, SOD, and VOID. Okay, and now we know what they are. So SID is source to image distance, VOID is object to image distance, and SOD is source to image distance. Okay, and the third one we're going to talk about today is focal spot size. Okay, and we make that determination as X-ray techs. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But back to SOD and VOID. Okay, so these are all three different distances. So we have, say we have a SOD, so our source to object distance is 36 inches, and our OID 4 inches. Okay, so if we do our math here, 36 plus 4 is 40, right? That equals our source to image distance. So our SOD plus our OID equals SID. Okay, now these can be extrapolated out any way to determine what the distance is for either your SOD, OID, or SID. Okay? Just by plugging in the numbers and doing the math. Okay, so as far as source image distance goes, okay, that's the distance between our X-ray tube and our image receptor. As a rule, the more distance you have between your X-ray tube and your image receptor, the more spatial resolution you're going to have, okay? Or the less magnification you're going to have, okay? Whereas if our SID is shortened, our source to image distance is shortened, we're going to have less magnification, or sorry, more magnification and less resolution, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind, something to keep in the back of your mind, okay? So more SID, right, equals less magnification and more spatial resolution. And it's saying right there that more SID is better. Okay, we shoot most of our images at 40 inches, okay, which has been determined to give us our best spatial resolution. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about OID, or object to image distance. Okay, so here we have a IR. Okay, here we have our objects or our patients. So the distance between our patient and our image receptor is what we've called the OID, or the OID, object to image distance. Okay, so here we have approximately 6 inches of distance. Okay, and here we have 2 images, or sorry, 2 inches of distance. So the smaller the distance between the object and the IR, the less magnification there is, and the sharper your image is. Okay, so as X-ray techs, we try our hardest to minimize the space between the image receptor and the patient. Okay, we want that patient as close to the image receptor as we can, so that we can prevent magnification, and it's going to make our image sharper. Okay, so less OID, less magnification, better spatial resolution or sharpness. Okay, so over here we got 6 inches. That's a big OID. Okay, so if we have a large OID, that's going to give us more magnification. It's going to make the body part bigger. Okay, but it's also going to decrease your spatial resolution or sharpness of an image. Okay, so whenever we're doing an image, we need to try and get that body part close to the image receptor as we can. Not only to deter any magnification, but to give us a sharper image. Okay, you know, it kind of makes sense. So if you go in the X-ray room and you turn on the collimator light and you put your hand down there on the image receptor and you raise your hand up, what's going to happen to your hand down here? Okay, it's going to get bigger. So the more we have object to image receptor distance, the larger our hand is going to be. So you put your hand up here and you look at the shadow of your hand, and it's going to be bigger and less sharp. The further you go up, the less sharp your hand looks, the shadow. Okay. Now, when you bring your hand back down to the image receptor, the smaller it's going to get and the more clear it's going to get. Okay. So that's how OID works. Just remember that. So when we're shooting a lateral C-spine or a lateral T-spine or a lateral L-spine, we've got a good amount of OID that we can do absolutely nothing about. So with the C-spine, we combat that by increasing our SID. It helps reduce the magnification, but it does make our image hurt a little bit as far as spatial resolution. The lumbar spine and T-spine, we're shooting those at 40 inches. There are some places that I've worked that will kick that up to 60 inches. We don't have capability in most of our clinics. There are a couple with the newer machines that can increase their SID distance, make those images a little bit better. But keep that in mind. You know, there's certain body parts that OID is unavoidable. Okay, you just need to do the best that you can. Okay. But, you know, when you think about OID, thinking about the hand, okay, the further you get away from the image receptor, the larger your hand's going to be and the less sharp it's going to be. The closer you get, the sharper and smaller it's going to be. Okay, that's how OID works. So let's talk about focal spot size. Okay, on your console in your X-ray room, there's a button there that says small focal spot or large focal spot, right? Okay, and what those do is those control whether you're choosing your small filament within your cathode or your large filament. Okay, this is supposed to depict right here. Okay, we've got our cathode, and it's got a tungsten wire. Okay, and one of them is short, and the larger one is longer. Okay, so is what happens is we talked about this last week about X-ray circuit. We send electricity to the filament. The filament heats up with a tremendous amount of heat, and it boils off electrons, right? So if we choose our small filament, we're going to have a smaller stream of electrons that are produced in the filament that are from the cathode that goes over to the anode, right? So the smaller the filament, the smaller the stream of electrons. Okay. Now, on the other hand, we've got a large filament or a large focal spot. When we hit the large filament, we're actually producing more electrons. They're going to go over to the anode right here to the focal spot and collide with the anode and produce X-rays. Okay, so small focal spot, you're going to have less X-rays, right? Less produced X-rays. With the large filament, we're going to have more electrons go across, translating into more X-ray photons. Okay, so the good rule of thumb is anything under 10 centimeters or approximately 4 inches, you can use a small focal spot. That's going to allow you, so, say you're doing a hand, wrist, finger, toe, foot. They're all under 4 inches or 10 centimeters. So we're going to use the default small focal spot. It's going to select the small filament, and it's going to produce the amount of electrons that we need to X-ray a smaller body part. And what we talk about, a small focal spot will give you a better image, more spatial resolution, more recorded detail, more contrast. So when you guys are doing extremity work, my suggestion is that you use a small focal spot. Okay? Now, when you start getting into bigger body parts, femurs, pelvis, all 3 spines, you're going to use a larger focal spot. Just for the fact that if we're bringing our mass up for, say, a lateral L spine, if we send 100 mass to the small filament, it's not going to work. Okay, your image is going to struggle just because that filament cannot produce the amount of electrons that you need it to have the amount of X-ray photons to penetrate the lateral L spine. Okay, abdomen, chest, spine work, pelvis, femurs, we're going to be using a large focal spot. Okay, we're still going to get a good image, a little bit less sharp. Okay, yeah, good rule of thumb. Remember that anything under 4 inches or 10 to 12 centimeters, we use a small focal spot. Okay, anything above that, we're going to use a large focal spot for the reasons that we've talked about. So when we use the small filament and it brings this amount of red electrons over to the focal spot of the anode, it produces rays, and our X-ray comes out of the collimator like this, kind of in a cone shape, and it hits our object, right? So if we hit the small film, we're going to have a small shadow on the outside, meaning that our recorded detail is better. So if we send all these electrons and we use the large filament, it's going to come over here, hit the focal spot, and it's going to come down an even bigger cone. Okay, and we're going to have unsharp edges on our image usually. That's due to the large filament or the large focal spot. Okay. One thing you need to be aware of, this part of the anode, which is called the focal spot. Now, this amount of electrons that comes over here, that's our actual focal spot. Okay, where the electrons hit the anode, that's our actual focal spot. Now, when it comes down like this, okay, what's probably boy, that's terrible. Our spot. That's crazy. I couldn't remember that. So the X-ray photons coming down from the large or the small. This is our actual focal spot, and this is our effective focal spot. And it makes sense. I mean, where it originates at the anode, that's our actual focal spot. When it comes down, that's our effective focal spot. It kind of makes sense. I can't believe I couldn't remember that word. In fact, we're going to write it down here. Effective focal spot. Okay, now we remember, right? Okay, so as a rule, small element is the small focal spot, right? And it's going to give us an increased spatial resolution and less blur, or penumbra. 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 Funny word, huh? Penumbra is a fancy word for blur on an image. Okay, so if we're using the small focal spot when we're supposed to, we're going to get greater spatial resolution, and we're also going to get less image blur or penumbra. Okay, if we're using a large filament, we're going to get the large focal spot, right? We're going to have more penumbra and less spatial resolution. Okay, just get that into your mind and think about it, and it'll make sense to you. Okay, so there's 3 other controllable factors to spatial resolution that I want to touch on today, and that's motion. Okay, any type of motion on an X-ray is going to degrade your image. Okay, it's going to make it look not good. Motion is an enemy to X-ray text. Okay, and there's 3 different kind of motions that we worry about. Number 1 is voluntary motion. Number 2 is involuntary motion. And the other one is mechanical motion or equipment. Okay, so voluntary motion is when your patient's moving and you don't want them to. You know, it's something that they can control, and we can try to control. The best way to combat voluntary motion is communication with your patient. Explain what you're doing. Let them know what's expected of them during the X-ray. Okay, that they need to be completely still. Okay, just let them know that it's up to them, that they get a good picture. Okay, they need to be still. So communication is the biggest part about voluntary motion and how we combat that. Involuntary motion, like peristalsis or your heart beating, anything like that is involuntary. There's just nothing we can do about that. Besides, we can change our technical factors so we get a really, really quick exposure. Okay? So we know that mass is milliampere times seconds. So if we reduce our time, that X-ray exposure is going to be really fast, and it's not going to catch some of that motion. You'll end up with a pretty good picture. Say you're doing a chest X-ray on a 3-year-old child. Okay, you know, it's hard to get them to hold their breath. You know, I've gotten really good about watching a child breathe and knowing when to expose that image, and the exposure is so fast that 9 times out of 10 you don't see any motion within the lungs. And the key to combating involuntary motion is exposure time. So the less exposure time, the better, or the more apt you are to not have involuntary motion. Okay. The third one is mechanical or equipment. You know, I've seen a couple X-ray machines that, you know, their locks get all hanky. Okay, they stop working, right? So if you put your X-ray tube in a upright position and then it starts to fall, okay, at that point you know you need to get some work done on it. Because if that X-ray tube is moving at all, it's going to translate to your image, okay, and give you poor recorded detail, okay, because that's one of the other 3 factors of spatial resolution. Okay, so keep up on your X-ray machine. If you know that it's starting to move around, without you making it move around, we need to get it looked at. Okay. So I hope you learned a little bit today about spatial resolution or recorded detail. Just remember that it's the sharpness of your image. Okay. And there's geometric factors that have everything to do with spatial resolution. So if we pay attention to our SID, OID, and our focal spot selection, okay, our images are going to be better. Okay. Just keep in mind that if we have more SID, your spatial resolution is going to be better. Okay. If we have less SID, you're going to suffer a little with your spatial resolution, as well as OID. Okay. If we have space between our patient and the image receptor, we're going to have magnification, and we're going to have less spatial resolution or less sharpness. So the closer we can get our patient to the image receptor, the better our picture is going to be, and the more to scale our image as far as size of the image that you're trying to take. Okay, and we also talked about focal spot size, paying attention to selecting your focal spot size according to the size of the body part that you are x-raying. Okay. So anything under 10 to 12 centimeters or 4 inches, you're going to use a small filament or small focal spot. Anything above that, we're going to use a large focal spot, which is going to allow us to send more electrons over here to the focal spot on the anode, and it's going to produce more X-rays. Okay. We also talked about a controllable motion factor, voluntary, involuntary, and mechanical. With voluntary, communication with your patient is key. Make sure they know what you're doing and what's expected of them. Involuntary, we're going to try to keep our exposure time down to minimum. Okay, make real quick exposure so we kind of skip past the involuntary motion. And equipment, make sure your equipment doesn't move by itself. Okay, well, I hope this was helpful. Like always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me and we can talk about things. I do apologize that I couldn't come up with that word. It drives me crazy. Anyway, effective focus. Come up with it now. Anyway, you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week. Okay, see you guys.